as I stated earlier, I'm excited about our first official guest on this new format because this particular month and going also into the month of May, we're going to be talking to women authors. And my first author here is Sister Betty Collier. She's the author of a new bestseller book, which is entitled Living Inside the Testimony. Living Inside the Testimony. So today, I want all of my guests to just welcome Betty Collier here to the Gatekeeper broadcast. I'm so delighted to have you. So we're just going to jump right into talking about this magnificent, as I would call it, masterpiece. We're going to give your information later on because one thing I want the listeners to do is I want them to go out and take a look at the website. First of all, we do want them to support it and purchase the book, but the cover of the book itself is just breathtaking. So before we go any further, let's talk about your title. How did you, where did this title come from? And then also let's talk about this cover because when you look at the cover, I mean, it just shows so much glory to me and just the magnificent and the magnitude of how big God is in our life. And then the title, Living Inside the Testimony. So let's start off. How did you, where did you get the title? And then also, let's talk about this cover.
Well, actually, that wasn't the original title to the book. I had a different title. It was We Never Could Have Made It Without You. Okay. And the you I was referring to, of course, was God. Mm-hmm. I had written the book. It was totally completed, and that was still my title. And I had given it to a few people to proofread and like an advanced manuscript copy of it before I had it bound. And they had read it, and the title just wasn't working for some. It was kind of confusing with the Never Would Have Made It Without You, you, of course, like I said, meaning God. And I had referenced Living Inside the Testimony several times throughout the book. Okay. First time was actually in chapter 2. And it was at one point when I guess I was kind of whining or pouting about my husband, not really understanding this living inside the testimony thing. And that was the first time it actually came to me. And I was saying that I really didn't, he probably didn't see it for what it really was, the true testimony that it was, because he was living inside it with me. Okay. And the thought just stuck with me, and I continued on with that really unknowingly throughout the book, referencing back to living inside the testimony and how we were both living inside it without realizing that's what we were doing. And when I started the book, he didn't realize our story really was a story to tell. It's a testimony that we continue this day still living inside. So as people read it, the title was kind of confusing, and one person had suggested maybe changing it to something that was a little clearer, and she suggested, since I had used it as a theme throughout anyway, living inside the testimony, and when she said it, it just made perfect sense. It's like, why'd I ever think the other title would have worked, because all of a sudden the other title didn't mean anything, and I had switched focus, and it really was living inside the testimony, and that just stuck so well. And I didn't have to change the book at all because that's what it really was all along. So after I realized it was really the testimony itself and not so much as what I was basing it on at first, although that's still the focus of it, we never could have done it without the Lord anyway. Yes. I was giving my testimony, the testimony that we were living inside this whole time without even realizing that that's really what we were doing, living inside the testimony. And also a double meaning because the testimony also goes into the details about the house. The house itself is a dream home, and that in itself is a testimony. We're living inside that house, the house being the testimony itself. So we're living inside the living testimony, our lives for the past 30 years when we met in middle school, and then also living inside the house. And the house speaks for itself. It's a testimony of how God blessed us to purchase that house on that land. And then as far as the cover, I go into great detail in the book about the cover, and it's also on the website. I included the entire cover story addendum on the website, so if people don't purchase the book, they can still at least view it on the website to see what a magnificent story that really is. And I was looking for the outstretched hands of Jesus, and that was my focus when I started writing the book. I wanted pictures of his hands outstretched as if he was giving me the dream home, and that's what I had envisioned the night before I started writing the book. And I found that picture on the website, and ultimately it became the cover of the book.
Wow, wow. Once again, for the ones who may have just tuned in, we are here with author Betty Collier. We're talking about her new release book entitled Living Inside the Testimony. And the very first page, when I began reading this book and I had an opportunity to let Betty know, the very first sentence or statement, the two words that really got me going in this book was, Elvis died. I mean, that alone was one of those hook statements. Let's talk about the beginning of your book. You met your husband when you were in middle school.
Middle school.
And from then on, you've been together ever since, huh?
Not exactly ever since. We were kind of shaky because we were so young, of course.
Okay.
And we were definitely a couple by ninth grade.
Okay.
We actually met in middle school and sort of fell in love, like, you know, kids do at that age. We were 13 and 14, and by 8th grade, you know, he was on the basketball team and I was a cheerleader, and we were, you know, talking. We considered ourselves boyfriend, girlfriend. And then in 9th grade, it was official. We were a real couple.
Okay.
You know, 14 and madly in love, you know, like 14-year-olds are. And, you know, throughout high school, we were kind of on again, off again, just couldn't quite seem to make it work. Different things would come up and, you know, we'd talk and then we wouldn't talk, and, you know, the struggles that a lot of young people who are in love have. So throughout high school, we were always a part of each other, but just not always together.
Yes.
Until a week before high school graduation, and it was from that point that we haven't been separated since, and that was because of the head injury that I discuss in the book that William suffered, and, you know, brought us both to our senses, and we realized it was time to correct this situation and make sure that we were never apart again.
I shared this with you a while back, that reading the book, I mean, you never know the next chapter.